Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you everyone for attending today. I really do appreciate your time and the invitation to join you for this afternoon regarding executive function. Again, my name is Gwen Sorley. My background is in education. I have a master's in education, and I started using play attention with my students in the classroom in a public school setting back in 1996. So I started working with individuals with attention difficulties and executive function and helping them improve those cognitive areas I've been doing this over 25 years now. So hopefully my experiences will really give you a better understanding of what executive function is and executive function's role in the learning process, because that is really critical to our conversation today. And right now, as you can see on the screen, I am COO and Vice President of Play Attention. So this really has given me an opportunity to continually develop programs that will actually help improve executive function. So as Karen said, if you do have questions during the presentation, please do type your questions in, and we will have a Q&A time at the end of the webinar. Now I'm just going to move this a little bit here. All right, so let's start with what is executive function, right? What is executive function? We hear about it a lot now. And executive function is really the management system of your brain. It allows us to get through our daily tasks. It's a set of cognitive processes that we use on a daily basis. So you can really think of executive function kind of like the CEO of your brain. It allows you to control your focus, your behavior, your emotions. It allows you to plan, prioritize, organize, avoid procrastination, and remain on task. Now, these are skills we obviously use every single day as children and adults, but these skills are often weak for individuals with attention difficulties. So it really comes to the question a lot of you often struggle with, and that is, why is my very bright child struggling? Why do I have this really intelligent student? I know he or she has an incredibly high IQ, and yet his grades or her performance don't match that. And a lot of times, and some of you might be able to relate to this, maybe you have a conversation with your spouse and you say, you know, I think that our son really needs some help in these areas, and we need to teach him some skills so that he can complete his homework and that he can actually organize his materials so that he'll do better in school. And your spouse may look at you and say, no, he's fine. He's just lazy, right? Or you might get a note home from the teacher, and the teacher says, you know, I know your daughter is very bright, but she just seems not to be motivated. Now, a lot of times these are misconceptions, right? Because it really comes down to not that they are not motivated or not trying hard enough, or they're just simply lazy, which a lot of these individuals are labeled as lazy. That's not the fact of the matter. The fact is they have weak executive function. 90% of children with attention difficulties or ADHD also have weak executive function. And if we don't develop these skills as children, then those difficulties actually carry into adulthood. So you may be familiar with this term, the twice exceptional child. So this kind of clarifies that question of, why is my really bright child struggling? Why is my really intelligent student getting D's and F's on his report cards? And oftentimes we have what's known as the twice exceptional child. The twice exceptional child is that student who is identified as gifted, but also ADHD, or gifted and has weak executive function. And this is very, very common. The clients that we typically work with are average to well above average in IQ. So they know the material. It's just the process that's difficult for them. It's the cognitive processes of executive function that are weak, and therefore they struggle in order to show what they know and to truly reach their full potential. So let's look at the different cognitive processes of executive function and how they relate to the learning process. First and foremost, of course, we have focus, right? Focus, not just focus in a general term, but focus, how to direct and sustain your attention to low stimuli, right? Because we know that attention deficit is a misnomer. There is no one with a complete deficit of attention. Usually they have great attention. It's just scattered over a variety of things, right? So they might be able to tell you a little bit about what the teacher said, but he also knows what the bird's doing outside and what Johnny's doing in the back of the room, because they're paying attention to bits and pieces of everything. Or you see this scenario, and probably many of you can relate to this. You have a very inattentive child, and yet she can come home and play her Xbox or her favorite video game or watch YouTube for hours and never move. In that case, she can hyper focus on that. And that's the other truth of ADHD. It's not a lack of attention. It's usually a diffused attention, or they have that ability. If it's high stimuli, they are wired to hyper focus on that, where it's hard to draw them away from it. So when we talk about focus in the learning process, what we're really talking about is their ability to direct and sustain their attention at will, much like being able to pay attention to the teacher in the classroom. Okay? And this is, of course, critical because we know the very first catalyst necessary for brain change is attention. If they are unable to pay attention, then no brain change is really going to occur. You can be the best therapist on the planet. You can be a fantastic teacher. But if your students or your clients cannot direct and sustain their attention to your teaching method or to your therapy, it's really going to be difficult for them to get maximum benefit from the lesson, from the therapy, in order to make those connections, in order for them to create those new neural pathways that are to be formed in the brain. So the very first process of executive function is focus. And if they're unable to focus, then it's going to be very difficult for them to get maximum benefit from the learning process. Now, we also look at initiation. And initiation, of course, is the ability to avoid procrastination. So many of you can probably relate to this in the form of homework, right? Homework that should take 15 minutes, but is taking you 2 or 3 hours every night. And usually the first hour of that is just simply your child trying to avoid that task altogether. And so there's a difficulty with that ability to start a task right away, right? Initialize, take that and prioritize and start the assignment right away to avoid procrastination. This is a very difficult thing for them. So this often, if they have weak executive function and they cannot start a task in a timely manner, then that is oftentimes why extra work gets sent home from school, because they're not able to finish the work in the day because they spend so much time just avoiding the task. Or that's why homework is taking an incredibly long time. So we really need to be able to strengthen that area where they can start the task right away. Now, we also have organization and planning and prioritizing. So this is all part of executive function. So you may have a child who can tell you absolutely everything there is to know about the solar system, right? You ask your child a question about the solar system and they can explain it in detail. They have so much knowledge about the solar system. But then the teacher gives an assignment, and the assignment is to create a diorama and write a short report that goes along with it to show parts of the solar system. And they have 1 week to do it. Well, now look at just the first 3 areas of executive function, right? You cannot really separate them. These all work together when we talk about the learning process. So remember, here is your very bright child, maybe a twice exceptional child, who has all of this knowledge about the solar system. And now it's time to focus in order to get an assignment done. Well, it's really difficult for your child to focus. And then we have to start this task, right? We really have to buckle down and start it because we only have 5 days in order to finish this project. And we should be able to do that, but we have to start right away. We have to start on Monday, right? In order to turn it in a timely manner. But your child avoids the task for an entire day because of weak executive function. He or she has a really difficult time starting that task the first time they're asked, the second time they're asked. So there's this avoidance. So now we have to initialize the task. And when we start the task, we can't just jump in, right? We have to have a plan. So we have to plan, prioritize, organize our materials. And if you think of all the steps that are involved in planning out, okay, what are we going to show in our diorama? That's the first thing we have to decide. What is each step of the process? What materials do we need? Are we going to be able to finish this in a timely manner? Well, let's see. Let's write down step 1, we have to do this. Step 2, we have to make certain that these materials are in place. Step 3, step 4, step 5, until you get to the point where you can actually turn it in on time. So if you think about your child who knows everything about the solar system, would he or she be able to sit down and plan this out without your constant guidance or redirection? If the answer is no, then they're probably struggling with weak executive function. And if that's true, then of course their end report, the end result, which they're trying to turn into the teacher, if it gets turned in at all, is not going to match their knowledge base. So this is really a good example of how weak executive function results in poor academic performance. Okay. Now we can also look at shift. Shift is another area of executive function. This is your ability, you may have also heard it as mental flexibility, right? Your ability to move from one situation to another, to transition, to change what you're thinking or what you're doing as the situation around you changes, as the task changes. And mental flexibility is one of those areas that is oftentimes weak for individuals with attention difficulties, right? You might see this in, it goes back to focus, right? If your child is hyper-focused on that YouTube video or that video game, or maybe hyper-focused on something they're very interested in, because you might have a child who has an attention difficulty, but she loves to read and she can hyper-focus on reading. The difficulty is that she doesn't know how to manage that hyper-focus. So this is where shift becomes very difficult. And if you have difficulty shifting, that means that when you ask her to stop reading and come to the living room because it's time to get ready to go to grandma's house, she has a really difficult time. She can't leave that reading material. He can't relieve that YouTube video without there being some kind of drama, without there being tears and an emotional meltdown, right? Because they have that really difficult time thinking flexibly, that mental flexibility. So that can also occur in the classroom, which can be really difficult. And it can also happen with adults. You know, you notice that they get very hyper focused on something, and yet because they have that inability to have that mental flexibility, they miss the 4 o'clock meeting because they're so hyper focused on this, they can't shift. They can't shift their attention. So that becomes very difficult. Working memory. This is kind of like, you can think of working memory as your mental workspace, right? It allows you to take in information, manipulate that information in some way, and then give a response, much like a mathematical word problem. So if you have rote memory, right, where I give you, let's say, a phone number. I say 555-1212. And then you give that phone number right back to me, the same order, exactly the same, 555-1212, right? That's your rote memory. I give you information, you give me the same information back. Working memory is more complex, where I say, okay, now you have, oh gosh, I'm going to use dollars. So let's say you have $1 and a pack of gum costs 25 cents. And I say, if you have $1 and a pack of gum costs 25 cents, how many packs of gum can you purchase with that dollar? So you have to take in that information, manipulate that information, and then give me another response. The response is 4. I can purchase 4. And so that is working memory, a very higher level thinking skill. Where we are able to take in that information, manipulate that information. And oftentimes, if your child has weak executive function or your student has weak executive function, in the classroom, you might say, okay, now I want you to put away your notebook, get out your history book, and turn to page 86. So you're giving them a set of instructions. They have to hold that information in their mental workspace, right? And then follow through. And so oftentimes your child who has poor working memory will get the first thing done, right? Put away his pencil. He'll get that first instruction done and miss the rest of the instructions. And then that oftentimes leads to him either getting in trouble or falling behind. And it really isn't because he is being defiant or just doesn't want to pay attention and follow through. It's that he has weak working memory, which is going to cause him to have difficulty following through with multiple step verbal instructions. So already you can see how if you have these areas and these areas are weak for you, it's going to be very difficult for you to have high performance, the performance level that might match your IQ in the classroom. We also have emotional control. And I mentioned emotional control a little bit earlier when we were talking about shift, right? Oftentimes this is where the emotional control is very difficult. When they can't shift, then it often results in an emotional response. So individuals with weak executive function often have poor emotional control. So think about your child or your students. Have you ever experienced this, where suddenly your child is having this emotional meltdown and you think, I just don't understand why he's having such a big reaction to a situation that was so small? Do any of you experience that? I bet you do. This is very, very common. Or in the classroom, you have a child who is doing a worksheet and suddenly she makes a mistake. And instead of simply erasing it and putting a new answer and moving on, she crumples up that paper, she throws it away, she storms out of the room. She has no control over those emotions. And that is very common. And of course, if this is occurring in the classroom, it's going to really affect their academic performance. And then there's inhibition. Inhibition is the ability to control those impulse responses, right? So it's your ability to stop, think, and then act, right? Instead of just seeing a situation and reacting. So your very impulsive students are those individuals who you start giving an instruction, and instead of waiting for all of the instructions, he's already going off and starting an assignment that he thinks is going to occur, but really he hasn't listened to all of the instructions. Inhibition or lack of impulsivity, I should say, is also comes out in their work, where they simply rush through their work just to get it done. But since they're rushing through their work, they miss all of those important details, right? They miss some of those important facts. They miss reading a certain instruction. So this often results in many careless mistakes. So again, that bright child who's rushing through an assignment because he's so impulsive will then have a poor grade on a test or a certain assignment because they've missed all of those important details. And then we have self-monitoring. Self-monitoring is that ability to reflect on your own performance based on some type of standard. And this is often very difficult for a child with weak executive function. They may look at the standard, what was the expectation? And usually they may judge themselves very high or very low. And it may not be really in line with their actual performance. So self-monitoring is another area that is really difficult for individuals with weak executive function. So again, if you reflect on some of your students who you've heard, he's just being lazy, or he is just being defiant, is that really the case? Or is it simply weak executive function? If they're simply struggling in the areas to plan, prioritize, organize, avoid procrastination, if they're having difficulties focusing in the classroom, that all leads, it all works together. If you look at all of these areas, they all interplay, right? They all rely on each other. And if these areas are weak, then of course, there's going to be low academic performance, no matter what the IQ is. Now, when you can think about this in your own life as well, and I really do want you to think about how executive function plays a role in your life, in your personal life, in your professional life. Because if you're going to teach and help strengthen executive function in your child or in your students, what is the best teacher? The best teaching is modeling. So think about executive function in your own life. And when I initially saw the ad for this webinar or the announcement, I should say, that Karen sent out, it had a picture of me with my chicken. And I thought, that is so silly. Why did she send out my farm picture with my chicken on that invitation to this webinar? I would never have done that. I kind of keep that separate. But really, when I started thinking about it, my venture, because I'm taking on chickens now, my venture in raising chickens is a great example of how I've had to use strong executive function. In order to take on that new task, I've had to plan. I had to know how many chickens I was going to get. I had to prioritize before they come onto the property. What do I have to have in place? How am I going to organize this? Who do I have to call first? Because first I have to call someone to come in and build the coop. It has to be the right size. I have to get a run in place. I have to get an automatic door in place. All of this has to be planned out and organized before I can actually bring living creatures onto the property. So it is a great example, actually, when you think about it, of how I had to have strong executive function in order to take on that new venture. And it does follow you into adulthood. So you may see many of your colleagues, or maybe even your spouse or other family members, who really are still struggling with executive function. I talked to a woman the other day, and she kept saying over and over, yes, I need help. My husband has ADHD. My son has ADHD. And they're just simply all over the place. And I keep looking at my husband, and I give him tasks to do. I told him he had to take over the yard this summer because I was going to be working and he was going to be home. So he had to take over the yard. And in 2 months, we had weeds that were 10 feet tall. And it just doesn't make sense. I tell him, you have a master's degree. You know how to do this. You can do this. There's no excuse. But actually, there is a very good reason of why that task of taking over the yard, just that general task without a plan in place, was actually daunting for him, was actually very difficult for him. It doesn't matter that he has a master's degree, right? Because if he has weak executive function, he's going to have difficulty planning, prioritizing, organize, initiating that task. And so it does follow into adulthood. So it is incredibly important we take steps in order to improve executive function now. So not only will they be successful as children, but they'll carry those skills into adulthood, which will lead to success in their personal lives and their professional lives. And, we expect students to have strong executive function by the time they reach middle school. By the time they're about 13 or 14, we expect them to be very strong in all of these areas. However, in the earlier grades, it's rare that we really straightforward teach these areas. And so the good news is we know through neuroplasticity that the brain is moldable, it's shapeable. And if we provide them with the right experience, the right challenge, they can develop these skills despite their current wiring. So that's the good thing, right? We can help them develop these cognitive processes that are necessary for strong executive function. And probably a lot of these things you're already doing, you've just never thought about it as an exercise in executive function. So think about these in a new way. Think about how these exercises or how these different activities actually strengthen executive function. And when you sit back and you think about that, you'll have a new awareness. So maybe you'll do some of these things more often. Maybe you'll start incorporating some of these things that you really thought were kind of trivial, but actually are really important in the learning process. So exercise is one that you can do that can strengthen executive function. Of course, whenever we exercise, we are strengthening the brain. We are helping focus. We are helping impulse control. So exercise overall should be part of your plan with both children and adults, because that just helps us overall. But if you think about exercise in another way, let's say you enroll your child in maybe a martial arts class, like a Taekwondo class. Think about how executive function is being developed in that Taekwondo class. He or she has to really be focused, right? Because there's a lot of different movements they have to learn. So they have to be focused on the instruction. And then also they have to incorporate that movement. So they have to remember the instruction and then follow through with actually performing a specific movement. And so you're actually strengthening working memory as well. Now, they also have to control their impulsivity during that class. So everything that they're doing within that Taekwondo class is helping to improve certain areas of executive function. Brain teasers, of course, helps them look at different things in new ways. And music, singing, dance, of course, any type of musical performance is going to help them with working memory, with impulse control. If they're going to be doing a performance, it helps with the planning, the prioritizing, the organizing. So all of those activities surrounding music can really help them strengthen executive function. And of course, strategy games. If you're playing a game like Risk or Monopoly, or I think we did a survey and one of our top rated games was Jenga. That's a great strategy game because you have to be focused when you're playing that game. You have to use some critical thinking, right? You have to plan what your move is going to be. You have to then control your impulse to just move something without really thinking it through. You have to stop, think, and then make your move. So those types of games that include strategy and impulse control are excellent at helping to develop strong executive function. Also, really, the games that you may play with younger children, Mother May I, Duck, Duck, Goose, Simon Says, those games all help with executive function. Just think about Duck, Duck, Goose, right? They have to really control their impulse to get up. They have to really be focused on the person who's speaking in order to know when it's their turn to get up and chase that person. So they really are, those games that we play in the early years are all really great for executive function. Organized sports, of course, are another great way to improve executive function. So not only do, of course, they have to have great focus for that, but also they have to remember very complex rules and then follow through with that. And they also have to control their impulsivity. If they're doing something like soccer or football, they have to be able to organize their thoughts and plan and prioritize what they're going to do first, what they're going to do next. They have to have that mental flexibility because in an actual game, the situation is changing all of the time. So they have to think flexibly in order to change with that situation that's constantly changing. And of course, emotional control. Whether they're very excited or about something or very upset about something that happened during the game, they have to learn how to control those emotions during that time. And then as you get a little bit older and you're looking at different skills for school, with your teenager, study skills is really important. Not just as a teenager, even early on, study skills is a really important way to help them develop executive function. And I know that BioLink has a great study skills course. And you really can think about this as far as helping your child or your student achieve. Because a lot of times I'll talk to parents who will say, you know, we took them to a tutor, and even though the tutor was really good, he's still failing in school. Well, that's often because of what we discussed earlier, right? He doesn't need tutoring. He's very bright. He knows the material, right? He needs study skills to help him bring it all together, get it down on paper, and actually show what he knows. So that's an area that really needs more focus than we often give it, or study skills. And then also you could do goal setting, because a lot of times parents are kind of at a loss, especially with their teenagers, on how to develop executive function. And goal setting is one of those areas that we can help them really do an activity that will help strengthen executive function. So if you think about a goal and get them to think about what they want to work towards, right? What is going to motivate them? It might be filling out college applications. It might be a trip they want to take. It may be getting their driver's license. And then really sit down and have them plot out how they're going to achieve that goal, right? That's going to take a lot of planning. So what are our long-term goals? What are our short-term goals? What are the steps we need to take in order to achieve those goals? What does our timeline look like? So think about a goal and ask them what goal would motivate them. Because if they're motivated, it's going to be a great exercise for them because they're going to be more invested in the activity. And then really work through the different areas of executive function when you're planning this out. Now, I've put together an activity that I have, and it's how to plan and prepare a healthy meal using executive function. And I would be happy to share this ebook with you. So if you're interested in going through just by yourself or with your family, you can go through this activity and use the different areas of executive function when planning your meal. So I've broken down all the areas of executive function, described what each of those areas looks like and how they apply to your meal planning and preparation. And then I go further into detail, step by step, outlining it all for you. So it's kind of a fun and healthy way to really break down executive function and start applying it and modeling it for your family, for your students, and for your children. So if you would like a copy of this ebook on how to plan and prepare a healthy meal using executive function, go ahead and type your email address in the chat box in if you're on Zoom, or if you're on Facebook, you can type in your email address there, and Karin will make certain that you get a copy of this. Again, it will just give you one exercise that you can do in order to have fun, create a healthy meal that will support a healthy brain, and also use your executive function. We also can help with executive function through the use of play attention. And of course, BioLink has the play attention exclusivity in their center. And this is a great way to improve executive function because we are going to specifically be working on all of the cognitive skills that are necessary for strong executive function. So if you're not familiar with play attention, what we do is we incorporate feedback-based technology with cognitive skill training and behavior shaping to provide you with the most comprehensive approach available. And the very key is our body wave technology. This is our specially designed armband. On the back, there are 3 sensors. And those sensors monitor your brain activity indicative of attention. And then that information is given over to the computer where you're allowed to control all of our cognitive exercises just with your mind, or more specifically, your attentive state alone. And you receive constant and immediate feedback as to whether or not you truly are focused and paying attention. And that's a really important first step in the learning process. Because remember, we said one of the very first processes of executive function is attention, is focus. But attention is so abstract, right? So many times we look at our students and we say, I need you to pay attention. And they look right back at you and they say, I am. And they really think that they are, but they have no idea what it takes for them personally to stay very focused, to low stimuli activity for long periods of time, right? So what we're doing with the body wave technology is we're taking that very abstract concept of attention and we're making it concrete and controllable, where they actually see their attention in real time. They feel what they're doing and they're allowed to practice skills. All of the skills that we address within play attention lay the foundation for strong executive function. And This is a critical part of the learning process, right? And in order to teach them focus, right? Because we said that in order for them to really spark brain change, they have to be paying attention. Oftentimes we teach attention through lecture, right? Although our learners, our students learn best through experience, right? If you provide your students or your child with an experience, they learn from that. But often with attention, we teach it through lecture, or we try to teach it through lecture, right? We say, sit still, pay attention, eyes on me. And we try to teach it, but it's still abstract. And so with play attention, when they can see their attention and actually control it, then you're providing them an experience. So the next time you say, I need you to pay attention, they know what you're talking about. They've been there before. They've experienced it in play attention. And then, like I said, not only do we have that feedback technology to make attention concrete, but then we incorporate it with specific cognitive skill training. And each cognitive area that we address, whether it's time on task or discriminatory processing, auditory processing, working memory, social skills, we're working on all of those cognitive skills that lay the foundation for strong executive function and self-regulation. So another great way to improve overall processing, overall cognitive skills, and executive function. So I hope that this gave you a really good overview of executive function. Remember, what we really wanted to achieve here today was to get a better understanding of what executive function is and executive function's role in the learning process. So at this point, if you have any questions, please do type them in the chat box or on Facebook. I'd be happy to address your questions, or if some of them are directed to her and she could address those as well.
Thank you so much, Gwen. Oh, and really, you explained this so. I could have sworn you were you a teacher at some point? Because it's absolutely you did it so well. Thank you so very much. I do have I've got a question from Peter, and he's actually asking, is it really not too late for me as an adult? Because I really struggle at work.
It really is never too late. And Peter, that's what we know through neuroplasticity, which is very important to keep in mind. It used to be thought that after about the age of 9, your brain didn't change very much at all, if at all. And we now know that that is not true, that your brain will continue to grow. You will continue to create new neural pathways throughout your lifetime. So it is definitely not too late. However, brain change doesn't just occur, right? You can't sit on your couch and eat a bag of potato chips and expect new neural pathways to become formed, right? There has to be certain critical catalysts in place in order for you to spark brain change. So attention, there has to be some type of challenge. There has to be feedback. So Peter, if you involve yourself in some of these activities that we talked about today, you can develop these skills that are necessary at any age. We've had people in our Play Attention program in their 70s and 80s who've made amazing changes in their memory, in their attention levels, in their executive function. So never too late.
Another one, it seems like you absolutely spoken to the parents tonight. We spoke to about their children, but it seems like you hit some critical things for the adults as well, because I've got one from Marina, and she's asking, can lack of executive functioning lead to being anxious, anxiety? And
definitely. And we see this so many times, Marina, in our clients. I would say that easily 75% or 80% of our clients who have weak executive function also have anxiety. And because you can really see how those, you can't really separate one from the other, right? You can't separate anxiety from weak executive function or anxiety from ADHD, because it's hard to know where one ends and the other begins. They're so interrelated. If you've experienced failure, if you've experienced where, you're really bright, and why can't I keep up with my colleagues who may not even be as bright as me, but they're doing really well. They're performing really well in the workplace. And here I am, I can't remember what I was supposed to do today. And that can really cause anxiety. So the fact that you have weak memory, or the fact that you can't plan and prioritize, and so you have low performance in your job place, of course is going to result in anxiety. So they're all interrelated. And unfortunately, as soon as you get stressed or anxious, stress and anxiety is not conducive to good attention. So as soon as you experience that, then you lose your ability to pay attention. So it's all interrelated. So Marina, it's really important to learn how to stay focused, to strengthen these areas that we've discussed, because once you can improve executive function, you'll see that your anxiety levels will lessen in severity. Really good question.
Yeah, and I can maybe, Gwen, from personal experience, on Monday, last week Monday, we actually talked about adult ADHD, and I was telling people how I really struggled with anxiety, of course, because of lack of planning and all of those things. But I always say, if I get so anxious, I shut down. I can't hear, I can't speak, I can't do anything. And if there's one thing that absolutely changed my mind, was the ability to be able to self-regulate. And I think, and that's the main thing that play attention did for me, because it actually gives you power to really take your life back, because you are able to have that power. And that's very, very powerful.
Yes, and if I could make a comment on that, how it relates back to play attention and anxiety. I told you that it gives you real-time feedback regarding your attentive state, but also, of course, your anxiety levels, right? Yes. Because as soon as you start getting anxious, you're not going to be able to activate the game. You're not going to be able to move that character in the right direction. So immediately you get that feedback that, okay, this is anxiety. And so then it helps with that self-regulation through that immediate feedback. And you better are able to not only recognize when that anxiety is starting to occur, but know how to control it. So that's a really important point.
Yeah, because we actually enrolled 2 children now the past 6 weeks into our program, to the Play Attention program, that has got no issue with academics or attention or anything, just self-regulating. That's the only thing they stress so much. And to see those children change is amazing, absolutely amazing. Got another one actually from a mom that's got a child. So she's asking, what is the youngest time the youngest age that a child can start using Play Attention?
Well, we typically recommend they're at least 5 years old. And the reason we recommend this is because they have to be developmentally at that stage where they can make the connections between what they're doing and what's appearing on screen. And that's a little bit of a higher level thinking skill that's typically really apparent around the age, or developed around the age of 5. But you can work on up all the way through adulthood, Peter.
Yeah. You see, never too late. And that's all I've got. Louisa, just say thank you very much for the session. So Gwen, that's all. I don't want to keep you at all. You have to go feed your chickens or build your poop. You've got lots of things to do. But thank you so much, and thank you for the amazing manner that you explained this. I think everyone is, and I'll send this out to everyone that registered that couldn't attend. And I really think everyone is really going to benefit with the practicality of how you explained this. So thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Okay, have a nice evening, everyone. Bye.
Bye.